She never knew that one ordinary night would become the night she lost everything. The storm rose without warning, fire lit the sky, and in a single breath, her home, her family, her world were gone. But from the ashes of despair came a whisper of peace. Tonight, let us walk her journey through loss, through sorrow, and into the stillness where healing begins. The family before the storm was like a painting of peace, framed by hills that rolled into the horizon and fields that glowed gold beneath the harvest sun. Anya lived in a village so small that travelers often passed it without notice. To the world outside, it was insignificant, but to her, it was everything, a place where life was measured not in wealth or possessions, but in laughter, in warmth, and in the breath of those she loved most. Her home was simple, built of timber and stone, standing quietly at the edge of the village like a guardian of her memories. The roof, carefully thatched by her husband Ratan, bore the marks of his labor and devotion. Inside, the air always smelled faintly of earth and wood smoke, a reminder of countless meals cooked and countless nights spent by the fire. Each morning followed the same rhythm. Before dawn, Anya lit the fire and stirred porridge in a clay pot, humming the lullaby her mother had once sung to her. Soon, she would hear the soft patter of little feet. Her daughter, bright-eyed even in the haze of sleep, would rush in first, demanding to taste the porridge with a mischievous grin. Her son, more reluctant to leave his dreams, would shuffle in afterward, rubbing his eyes, yet smiling at the sight of steam rising from the pot. Then came Ratan, tall and strong, with the earthy scent of fields clinging to his clothes. He had already tended the animals, his hands calloused from years of labor, yet his presence was always tender when he entered the kitchen. He would kiss Anya's forehead, lift his daughter high into the air, and ruffle his son's hair until the boy laughed. These moments, though ordinary to others, felt sacred to her. She often thought, if only life could pause here forever, I would ask for nothing more. As the sun rose higher, Anya worked in the garden behind the house. Rows of vegetables stretched neatly in the soil, their leaves shimmering in the light. She loved the feeling of the earth beneath her hands, the way life seemed to grow silently under her care. Her children played nearby, weaving flowers into crowns, chasing each other through the grass, their laughter like bells echoing across the valley. The inside of their little house told its own story. Embroidered cloths that Anya had stitched hung on the walls, each pattern recalling a season of her life. A worn blanket she had sewn during her first pregnancy still rested on the children's bed, carrying the scent of countless nights of warmth. On a wooden shelf sat a box carved by Ratan, holding his father's old knife, a legacy passed down, as enduring as the land they tilled. Every object whispered memory, and every corner radiated love. Evenings were their most cherished time. After supper, they gathered by the fire. The children nestled against Anya's lap as Ratan told stories, some ancient tales of gods and kings, others from his own boyhood mischief. Anya would smile, sometimes correcting his exaggerations, making the children laugh even harder. Their lives were not filled with riches, but these were treasures beyond measure: the sound of laughter, the warmth of touch, the glow of togetherness. Still, there were nights when Anya felt a faint unease, a whisper in the wind that slipped beneath the door. She would lie awake, listening to the sigh of the breeze through the trees, feeling an ache in her chest she could not explain. She told herself she was foolish. Nothing could harm us here, she thought. not in this quiet corner of the world. And yet, deep down, she sensed a truth she dared not speak, that no life, no matter how peaceful, is beyond the reach of change. The Buddha once taught, even in the moments of greatest joy, impermanence is already at work. Though Anya did not know those words, she felt their echo. The happiness she clung to was as fragile as a flame, easily extinguished by the slightest breath of fate. One evening, as they ate together, Ratan spoke with a furrowed brow. "The clouds are forming strangely this year," he murmured. "The rains may be heavy." Anya glanced at him, worry flickering in her eyes, but she said nothing. She trusted him. He had always known the land better than anyone. Still, she reached under the table and held her daughter's hand tightly, as though her grip could keep the world from shifting. Her son chattered on about games with other village boys. Her daughter sang a tune she had invented, her sweet voice rising like a bird against the weight of her father's words. For a moment, their innocence wrapped the family in light, pushing away the shadows gathering quietly at the edge of Anya's heart. That night, the stars burned bright above the village, countless and eternal. After putting the children to bed, Anya stepped outside. The cool air touched her face as she looked upward at the constellations she had known since childhood. Beneath their ancient glow, she felt the fragile beauty of her world, the roof above her, the hands that held her, the voices that filled her home. She drew in a long breath, savoring the sound of her children's breathing from the next room, the steady presence of her husband beside her. She smiled, content. The family before the storm was safe, warm, and whole. But storms do not announce themselves until they arrive, and if Anya had known how swiftly a single night could shatter everything she held dear, she would have clung to that moment with all her strength. The night sky turns dark, not all at once, but in whispers. On the evening before everything changed, the air carried a weight that Anya could not name. It was early summer, yet the wind felt restless, colder than it should have been. The village children, usually loud with games and shouts, grew quieter as dusk approached, their laughter tapering into uneasy silence. Anya noticed the stillness while she washed the bowls after supper. The flames in the hearth flickered strangely, bending as though drawn toward something unseen. She frowned, wiping her hands on her apron, and peered outside. Above the hills, clouds were gathering, not the gentle grey of rain, but towering masses tinged with green, pulsing as if alive. Her husband Ratan joined her at the doorway. His eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. "The sky is wrong tonight," he muttered, his voice low but firm. "The winds have shifted. The river will rise." Anya's chest tightened. "But it's too early in the season," she whispered. Ratan didn't answer. His silence was heavier than words. He had grown up reading the land like scripture. When he sensed danger, it was rarely mistaken. That night, as the stars tried to pierce the rolling clouds, Anya tucked her children into bed. Her daughter clung to her sleeve, whispering, "Mama, I had a dream. The house was shaking, and I couldn't find you." Anya stroked her hair, forcing a smile. "Dreams are only shadows, little one. Go to sleep. Mama is here." But her daughter's wide eyes reflected the storm outside, and for the first time, Anya wondered if children could sense truths that adults had forgotten how to see. She returned to the doorway and stood beside Ratan. The wind had grown stronger, whistling through the trees like a warning. Dogs barked in the distance, restless, pawing at the earth. Anya shivered. though the air was thick and heavy with heat. Later, as she lay beside her husband, sleep refused to come. Her mind replayed her daughter's words. The house was shaking. I couldn't find you. The night sky turned darker still. A strange light flashed along the horizon, not lightning exactly, but something pale and unnatural, as if the heavens were tearing. Thunder followed low, growling, like the earth itself groaning in pain. Anya pressed closer to Rattan. "Tell me it's nothing," she pleaded softly. He put a hand on hers. It was calloused, steady, yet she could feel the tension in his grip. "Whatever comes," he said, "we will face it together." The promise calmed her, if only for a moment. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady breathing of her children in the next room, praying silently that dawn would arrive without harm. But dawn never came gently. In the deepest hours of the night, the storm broke. Rain lashed the roof, sharp and violent, like stones hurled from the heavens. Wind screamed through the cracks, rattling the shutters, slamming the door against its frame. The children awoke, crying, their small bodies trembling as thunder shook the house. Anya gathered them into her arms, her voice trembling as she whispered lullabies drowned by the roar outside. Rattan rushed to the door, securing it with whatever he could find. "Stay with them," he shouted above the storm. "Don't let them be afraid." The night sky, once a blanket of stars, had become a furious sea. The moon vanished behind the black mass of clouds. Flashes of lightning tore open the darkness, illuminating the village below. Anya glimpsed roofs lifting, trees bending until they snapped, the river swelling beyond its banks like a beast breaking free of its cage. Her daughter sobbed into her chest. Her son clutched her arm so tightly his nails dug into her skin. She kissed their heads, heart pounding, whispering, "Mama is here, Mama is here," though she herself felt the terror of a world unraveling. Hours stretched like eternity. Between the screams of the storm, Anya thought she heard other cries, neighbors shouting, animals wailing, the groan of wood as houses collapsed. Each sound was a blade carving fear deeper into her chest. She wanted to run, to gather everyone and flee, but where could they go? The storm was everywhere, surrounding them, pressing down like a hand of iron. At one point, she looked at Rattan. His face was pale but determined, his body braced against the door as though he alone could hold back the sky. Their eyes met, and in that fleeting moment, she saw the truth. He knew this was no ordinary storm. This was a force that could take everything from them in a single breath. The night sky had turned so dark that even the stars seemed to abandon them. Yet, in that darkness, Anya felt something else stir inside her, a fragile awareness she could not explain. It was as though the universe whispered, "This too will pass. Nothing lasts, not even the storm." But her heart, clinging to the family she held in her arms, cried out, "Not them, please, not them." By the time the first pale light of dawn broke through the clouds, the storm had not yet ended, but it had changed. The rain slowed, the winds shifted, and for a brief, fragile moment there was silence, a silence heavy with the weight of what had already been lost and what was still to come. Anya's eyes burned from exhaustion, her arms aching from holding her children all night. She looked at Rattan, who leaned against the shattered door, drenched and weary. The house still stood, but it was trembling, and deep down, Anya knew this was only the beginning. Fire and flood do not ask permission. They arrive together, like twin fists closing over a single throat. The first pale light of morning had barely lifted when the wind returned with a howl that made the shutters jump in their frames. Anya had just begun to believe the worst might be over. The rain seemed to be tiring. Even the thunder rolled farther away, as if the storm had grown bored of them. Then the air changed sharp, metallic, electrified. A single flash split the sky, so bright it carved the world into paper silhouettes. Somewhere to their left, a tree exploded with a sound like bone snapping. The ground shook. A moment later the smell reached them, not just rain and mud, but something bitter, dry and final. "Fire," Ratan said. The word left his mouth like a verdict. Anya whirled toward the kitchen. The hearth was cold. She'd doused it hours ago. Then she saw the faint orange thread crawling along the edge of the thatch outside the window, a serpent of sparks marching against the wind. The lightning had found the roof. "I'll go up," Ratan said, already moving. "You keep the children close." "Ratan, no." Her voice cracked. "The wind." He turned, and for a heartbeat, he was the same man who kissed her forehead every morning, the same father who lifted their daughter high above his head until she squealed. "Whatever comes, we face it," he said softly. Then the softness vanished, swallowed by urgency. "Water, blankets, wet them." Anya moved before the meaning caught up. She filled the basin, plunged blankets in, wrung them till they dripped. The children clung to her legs. Her son tried to be brave, jaw clenched, eyes too wide. Her daughter cried without sound, little body shaking as if it remembered a dream it could not forget. Ratan kicked the door open. Wind punched into the house, cold and furious. The roof creaked, a low animal moan. Through the doorway, Anya saw the sky again, green, black and churning. The river, usually a thin ribbon behind the yard, had thickened into a brown muscle that flexed and surged, devouring the banks. He didn't look back as he ran into the storm, bare feet slipping, hands scrambling for the ladder he kept against the eaves. Anya followed to the threshold. The air was needles. She thrust a wet blanket into his hands. He climbed. Then the second enemy arrived. Water tested the door first. An insult, just a thin line seeping beneath the threshold, making the boards gleam. Anya backed away to gather the children. The line grew into a trickle, the trickle into a tongue. She glanced down. The water was already past her ankles, cold as fear. She lifted her daughter and reached for her son. He tore his hand away, a little soldier, trying to prove something no one asked of him. "I can help," he shouted, though the wind stole half the words. He grabbed a bucket and sloshed toward the hearth. "I'll bring water." "Stay with me," Anya cried, but he couldn't hear her, or didn't. Something above, cracked, sharp, splintering, near. Anya looked up in time to see the thatch flicker alive, a line of flame tasting the edge of the roof. Ratan crawled along the ridge, pressing the wet blanket into the blaze. For a breath, the fire hissed, shrank. Then a gust lifted the blanket like a sail and flicked the flame forward, leaping from one bundle of straw to the next, hungry and certain. "Ratan!" she screamed. He didn't look down. He couldn't afford to. The door gave up then. It didn't swing so much as bow, then fall inward under the weight of the river that had decided, at last, to come inside. Water lunged across the floor, overturning the table, chewing up chairs, slamming into Anya's shins, so hard she staggered. Her daughter's arms tightened around her neck. Her son slipped, disappeared, and reappeared with a gasp, coughing. hair plastered to his forehead. "Up!" Anya shouted. Her voice was the only solid thing left. "To the loft, now." She pointed to the ladder that led to the small sleeping loft, where they kept spare blankets and winter clothes. The boy scrambled toward it, hacking wet air from his lungs. Anya lurched after him, daughter clinging, her own breath ragged. The water chased them, climbing the walls, sending bowls and books spinning like leaves. The window shattered. A branch or a stone or maybe the river itself threw itself through the glass. Wind sucked the flames inward, feeding them. Smoke filled the room, a sudden ocean they couldn't breathe. Anya's eyes burned. She's wrapped the end of her scarf around her daughter's mouth and then around her own, the cloth instantly damp with breath and fear. Her son reached the ladder. He climbed like a cat, fast and desperate, coughing into the crook of his arm. Anya followed as quickly as the little body in her arms allowed. Halfway up, the house shuddered. The beam above them groaned. A shower of sparks rained down, stinging her scalp, her knuckles. She kept climbing. "Go, go," she called to her son, as if he might stop to wait for her. He didn't. His small hands, those hands that ached from carving whistles and tying knots, found the edge of the loft. He pulled himself over and turned to reach for his mother. In that exact breath, something changed. She couldn't name it, only feel it. The way a deer feels. The air changed before the bullet. The left wall buckled. The river shoved through the broken window like a crowd breaking a door. The ladder lurched. Anya clung with one hand, her daughter with the other, feet scrabbling for traction that wasn't there. She looked up into her son's eyes and saw a universe of terror and a universe of courage fighting each other. "Take your sister," she gasped, shoving the little girl upward. He grabbed his sister's wrists. For a heartbeat, triumph, he had her. He really had her. Then the ladder kicked sideways. The rung under Anya's foot gave way, and the three of them were geometry angles and arcs above a mouth of water. Anya did not let go. She didn't let go when boiling smoke bit her throat, when a beam slammed across her shoulder, when the river tried to drag her backward into its body. She roared without sound. She threw her daughter up, toward the ledge, as if surrendering her to the sky. Small fingers clapped the wood. The boy leaned so far forward he nearly toppled, caught the girl's forearms, and hauled. Little knees scraped over the edge. For a second, Anya saw both of them there, two small faces peering down through the grey. She reached for her son. The house chose then. The central beam cracked, not slowly, not mercifully. The sound was final, a judge's gavel. The far half of the roof fell inward, a wave of thatch and fire collapsing into the space between mother and son. Wind took the flame in its jaws and blew it into a single, searing wall. Heat slapped Anya's face so hard, black bloomed in the corners of her vision. She screamed his name. He screamed hers. The river took the rest. Afterward, time became a strobe. Images, not continuity. Rattan on the roof, a dark figure against a theater of fire crawling toward the collapse. The roof listing, the ladder thrashing like a trapped animal, the loft where her children had napped on summer afternoons, spitting fire through the gaps in the boards. The boy's voice, thinner now, somewhere behind the smoke. The girl's sobs close to her ear, then not close at all. She doesn't know how the loft surrendered her daughter. Did the floor give way? Did a section of wall open and invite the river's wet hand to snatch her? All she remembers is a second window breaking, a white rectangle of outside carved into the smoke, and her daughter's small body sliding, then missing, then gone. Just gone, like a candle blown out in a room you thought was sealed. Anya lunged. Water took her under. The shock of cold tore all thought from her head. Her body became a machine that kicked and clawed. She came up in a pocket of air near the door, slammed her shoulder into what remained of the frame, sucked in breath and smoke, coughed it back out, screamed until her throat grated. "Ratan! My son! My girl!" Words became rocks thrown at a flood. The roof surrendered next. It folded like a tired animal lying down. As it came, she saw Ratan leap no, fall no, launch himself toward the edge. A beam swept him sideways. He hit the ground and vanished beneath water gone to mud. She thrashed that way, slammed into a log, felt the world tilt, felt the river's logic right itself over hers. Down is forward, breath is history, light is a rumor. Her hand found nothing. Then something cloth, skin, and then nothing again. She found her son by accident, a lull in the smoke, a gap in the fire, and there he was behind the shattered table, wedged against the wall by a snarl of chairs. His eyes were open in a way that made her heart fail and restart. She climbed over slick wood, dragged him into her arms. He was heavier than he'd ever been. His chest fluttered, then didn't. She slapped his back, begged the world, begged whatever heard. He coughed once, a small, terrible sound that held the shape of goodbye. Anya ran then, not because the fire spared her, or the river forgave her, but because the part of her that still remembered movement took over. She waded, stumbled, slid through a doorway that wasn't there an hour earlier, carried by a current that wanted everything. She held her son tight to her chest, heart beating his name into his hair. The yard had become a river. The fence posts were bones. She aimed for the hill beyond the house, where the ground rose, and maybe the water would not. Each step was a coin flip. She fell, she rose, she fell again. Neighbors were there, and not their figures, wading, shouting, grabbing at one another, only to be torn apart by the same hand that offered them up. A man tried to reach her and vanished below the surface, then bobbed up 10 feet away, as if the river were a cruel magician. A woman clung to a tree trunk and screamed a name that wasn't Anya's, which somehow made Anya feel less alone. She made the hill, or rather, the hill found her. The water dropped an inch, then 2. She gained the slope, fell to her knees, and rolled her son onto the wet grass. His face was grey, lips the blue of winter. She pushed air into him with shaking breaths, pressed her palms to his chest, counted numbers that dissolved in the wind. "Stay, please stay." She spoke to him in the language of babies, of first steps, of nights when he'd had fever, and she had willed him cool with her hands. "Stay, my heart. Stay, my boy." The storm did not pause for her prayer. It rumbled, indifferent, dragging its sacks of rain toward the next village. The fire behind her took the last of the house, sighing as beams collapsed into ash. The river kept a few of her bowls, her stitches, the blanket she had sewn while pregnant with this boy whose name filled her mouth and could no longer be carried by his lungs. When the truth arrived, it did not knock. It sat down beside her like an old companion and touched her shoulder. The body beneath her hands had already become a letter she could not deliver. She gathered him to her chest and rocked, though rocking could only move grief, not undo it. Somewhere in the grey distance, she thought she heard Ratan's voice. She lifted her head. The hill was a theater of chaos, people calling, the crack of falling trees, the hiss of rain finding hot places, the endless talk of water. "Ratan," she called, and waited for the answering shout. The wind offered her pieces of other lives, someone's sob, someone's curse, but not his name. She shouted it again, then again, until the name itself felt like a rope she was throwing into a well that had no bottom. By the time the rain thinned to a ragged curtain and the river tired of its theft, there was nothing left to do. The house was gone. The yard was a new riverbed. The sky was a lid, heavy and low. In the space of a morning, the world had made her into a woman who had once had a family. She did not move when the neighbors came. Hands touched her shoulder, her hair. Words fell around her, gentle, rough, true, useless. She stared at what she held and what she had lost, and the two were the same. Fire and flood had argued over her life. Both had won. Only when the wind stopped howling did she notice it. The absence of sound after so much noise. It pressed against her ears until it was a sound of its own. She had screamed so long she didn't know how to stop. The silence taught her. She did not cry then. Not yet. There are tears that belong to the echo, not the event. There are tears that the body will not give, while the body is still negotiating with the world. She folded her boy's hands over his chest, set her forehead against his, and closed her eyes. In the quiet space between one heartbeat and the memory of the next, something inside her let go, not of him, not yet, but of the idea that morning had any mercy to offer. The day had taken its shape, and that shape did not include the house, the roof, the laughter. It included a hill, a woman, a body, and an empty place where a husband's voice should have been. When the last scream fades, the world does not return to normal. It does not offer comfort or even words. It offers silence, a silence so heavy that it feels louder than thunder, more terrifying than the storm itself. Anya sat on the hill with her boy's body in her lap, her hair plastered against her face, her clothes soaked in river mud. The fire had already consumed the last bones of her house, leaving behind only a black skeleton against the grey morning sky. The neighbors moved like shadows below her, searching for survivors, pulling driftwood from the current, gathering the wounded. Their voices rose and fell, but to Anya they sounded distant, muffled, as though she had stepped into a world sealed in glass. The silence after screams is not empty. It is filled with what is missing, the absence of her daughter's cries, the absence of her husband's steady voice calling her name. It was filled with questions that bit like knives. Where are they? Could they still be alive? Or had the storm stolen them too? She tried to rise, but her body would not obey. Her arms clung to her son as if he were still breathing. His small frame, once so warm, had become unbearably heavy, as though the earth itself was trying to reclaim him. She pressed her forehead to his hair, now cold and stiff with river water. At some point, someone approached. A hand rested gently on her shoulder. It belonged to the neighbor woman, Marie, whose own eyes were red from loss. "Anya," she whispered, "you must let me take him. You need rest." But Anya shook her head violently, clutching her boy tighter. The thought of surrendering him even to the soil was unbearable. Her arms trembled, but she would not release him. Marie knelt, tears streaming, her own grief reflected in Anya's silence. She didn't press further. Instead, she placed a cloak around Anya's shoulders and left her there, a statue carved of sorrow, facing a horizon that had devoured her life. Hours passed. The storm clouds began to break, letting thin slices of light through the ruins. Birds should have returned by then, but the forest remained mute, as if nature itself held its breath. Anya's throat burned raw from screaming. Now, no sound would come. She opened her mouth once to call her daughter's name, but only a rasp escaped. The silence after screams is the silence of a heart that has been ripped open, a silence so deep it becomes a new language. She thought of her husband, Ratan. The last glimpse she had of him was his body swallowed by the flood. Was he gone? Or was he clinging to some branch, fighting the same river that had stolen her son and daughter? She wanted to believe he still breathed somewhere, but the silence offered no proof, only its cruel echo. If he lived, he would have found you by now. As afternoon stretched on, the village began to count the dead. Each name carried like smoke across the valley, names that left widows kneeling, fathers clutching the earth, children suddenly orphaned. The silence between names was heavier than the names themselves. Anya remained apart from them, her arms numb, her eyes fixed on the distance. Time began to dissolve. She no longer knew if minutes or hours had passed. The world had flattened to three things: the body in her lap, the ruins of her home, and the endless silence pressing against her ears. She remembered small things, as grief often forces the mind to do. The way her daughter's hands had smelled faintly of flowers after weaving crowns, the way her son used to pout when he lost at games, the way Ratan's laughter always started low before erupting like thunder. Each memory stabbed her, sharper than any blade. The silence after screams carries these memories like ghosts, hovering close enough to touch but vanishing when she reached for them. At dusk, when others lit fires to keep warm, Anya remained in the same place. The cloak Marie had given her was damp, her body shivering, but she didn't notice. Inside, she was colder than the night. Finally, as the stars began to return timid, trembling, as though ashamed to shine over such ruin, she laid her boy gently on the ground beside her. Her fingers lingered on his hair, smoothing it back one last time. The neighbors had dug a small grave nearby, and though she had resisted all day, exhaustion had emptied her of strength. She whispered to him, though no one else could hear, "Forgive me. I couldn't save you. I couldn't save any of you." Her words fell into the soil like seeds, seeds of despair that would bloom in nights to come. The silence answered, as always, with nothing. That night, she lay on the hill, staring at the sky. Where once the stars had been symbols of hope, they now seemed like eyes, watching her with pity. She closed her own eyes, wishing to vanish. Death no longer frightened her. What frightened her was the thought of continuing to live in this silence, carrying an absence larger than herself. Her body ached, but her heart ached more. She prayed not to gods, not to anyone she believed would answer, but to the silence itself. "Take me too. Let me go with them." But the silence after screams does not take. It leaves. It leaves you here, stranded, forced to breathe again, forced to rise when there is no reason left. By dawn, Anya had not slept. Her eyes were swollen, her body weak, but the sun rose anyway. Villagers were already at work, clearing debris, rebuilding what they could. Mari returned and pressed bread into Anya's hands. She didn't eat. She only sat, staring at the river that had rewritten her life. The world had screamed. Now it demanded she exist in its aftermath. And as the second day began, Anya realized the silence was not leaving. It had settled inside her, become part of her breath. her bones. The screams were over, but their echo would live in her forever. A woman in ashes, that's what the village would later call her, not out of cruelty, but because no other name seemed to fit. The storm had taken away the nouns that once defined her. Wife, mother, keeper of a small warm house at the edge of the fields. In their place, the morning left adjectives made of dust, empty, silent, scorched. She sat on the slope above the river as the light grew, a figure carved out of soot and grief, with nothing in her hands now but the shape of what had been there. Below, the blackened footprint of her home smoked faintly. Where the hearth once glowed with the quiet fire of supper, a circle of ash still held its ground, stubborn as a memory. Charred beams jutted up at angles, ribs of a beast that had died on its back. Each breeze lifted a skin of grey and laid it down elsewhere, as if the house, even in ruin, could not stop moving. For a long time she did nothing but watch. People crossed the yard that was no longer a yard, stepping carefully, calling to each other, picking through the debris with poles. They were searching for objects that could be saved, for bodies that could be named, for an order that could be restored. Anya felt like a guest at the excavation of her own life. Mari came again with a cup of weak tea and a rough loaf, the heat of it balming Anya's cold hands despite the early sun. "Eat," Mari said softly. "You'll need strength." Strength for what? Anya wondered. There was no house to rebuild, no children to tend, no husband to measure the days with his steady tread. But she ate, a small mouthful that hurt to swallow, and nodded, because nodding was easier than speaking. Marie's hand lingered on her shoulder. Then she left, moving down the slope to join the others picking through the wreckage. Only when the hill's grass pressed patterns into her knees and her back shivered against the warmed air did Anya stand. She walked down among the ruins, because standing still felt like refusing to breathe. Each step ground ash into her skin. Bits of their life introduced themselves, uninvited. A spoon turned blue, black with heat, the iron latch from the pantry door, a fragment of glazed bowl with the sunburst pattern she had always liked. She recognized the pattern before she recognized what it belonged to. Perhaps that was mercy. She crouched by the corner where the children used to stack their stones and pretend they were castles. The stones were scattered, their imagined kingdoms erased by a different story. Near them, tucked into a pocket of earth the river had missed, she found the wooden toy flute her son had carved last spring. The end was split now, the mouthpiece warped, but her mind could still conjure the thin, proud notes he'd coaxed out of it, cheeks puffed, eyes bright with triumph. She put the flute to her lips and tasted ash. No sound came. She held it to her heart instead. Close to where the window had framed the fields, something bright winked from the soot. She brushed with her fingers and uncovered a small circle of metal, the simple band Rattan wore when they wed. The fire had charred it dull and left the familiar nick on its underside, the one he had gotten when a plough blade slipped years ago. The ring's heat had gone. It sat in her palm cold as a coin. For a moment, she imagined sliding it back onto his finger, feeling that warm, living knuckle beneath. She closed her fist around the ring as if it might soften and pulse again. The carved box that held Rattan's father's knife was nowhere. The river had likely taken it, as if collecting debts. It would carry the blade down past the village bend, past the reeds where her children had once caught frogs, past the split willow that had offered shade on hot afternoons, until the knife was only another dark thought moving beneath the surface. "Anya," someone called. "Stay back from the western beam, it's not settled." The voice belonged to Lorne, the big miller, gentler now than his size suggested. She stepped aside, letting the men wrestle a fallen truss into a safer angle. They worked without the old rhythm of banter. Words felt expensive. At the far edge of the ruin, something soft lay half buried in silt. She did not want to look. When she did, it was not a body. It was the flower crown her daughter had woven a day before the storm, a circlet of stems and bright petals now turned to dark pulp, still clinging to their braided pattern. Anya lifted it with both hands, and the circle collapsed, smearing her palms green-brown. The child's nimble fingers rose in her mind, moving, matching stem to stem, making something pretty out of the field's leftovers. Anya pressed the ruined ring of plant to her chest and let the stain mark her dress like a badge. By noon, the search along the banks had brought back 2 neighbors and the cow they had feared lost. Its miraculous escape, a story that would be told for years. It did not bring back Rattan. It did not bring back the small body that had slipped from the window's white frame like a dream fleeing daylight. Several times Anya walked to the river and stood there, the current tugging at her ankles, like a child who needed to be carried. Several times she stepped backward before the water could take that as consent. The river did not argue. It slid by with a voice low and indifferent, as if reciting a poem it had learned before the first house was built. "Come to my home tonight," Marie said when the sun teetered toward the ridge. "We'll make room." Anya shook her head. Words formed and failed. She did not know how to explain that leaving this ground felt like betraying the ones who could not leave it. "I'll stay here," she managed finally. "Just here. Then we'll bring blankets," Marie said, as though the problem were the night air. They brought a blanket that belonged to no one important enough to be missed, and a clay lamp soothed to a low glow. Someone stuck 2 poles into the soft earth and stretched a torn canvas between them, an apology of shelter that kept off neither the night nor the past. Anya sat on the blanket and placed the ring and the toy flute in her lap. The lamp's flame winked, a small brave heart in a world still out of breath. When darkness returned, the sounds changed. Hammers paused, voices dimmed, and the ruin settled into its new shape. The night insects began their indifferent chorus, and a dog barked twice as if to announce that despite everything, dogs were still dogs. Anya drew her knees up and wrapped her arms around them. The little flame painted her hands in gold. Beyond that circle lay a country the lamp had no power to map. Around midnight, sleep visited. It did not enter gently. It dragged her down in lurches, a ladder with missing rungs. Dreams arrived like scavengers, picking at what remained. She saw Rattan walking toward her through a curtain of rain, stretching his hand. When she reached out, her fingers closed on smoke. She saw her daughter at the river's edge, weaving a crown out of reeds, laughing. When Anya ran to her, the girl turned and her face was made of water. The dream shifted, the way dreams do when they sense a truth too plain to show. She curled tighter on the blanket and let the night carry her where it willed. Dawn woke her with cold. The lamp had burned itself to a black eye. Her neck ached, the kind of ache that had nothing to do with muscles. She rose stiffly, ring and flute pressed into her pocket. A pale mist clung to the ruins, thickening in the hollows, thinning where the sun found purchase. A pair of crows hopped along a blackened beam, curious as thieves. When she stepped closer, they lifted without hurry and left, as if insulted that she had interrupted their inspection. The village elders gathered near the bend where the river had calmed. They spoke in practical terms: shelter sites, a line of cooks, the order of digging for those still missing. Life, which had shattered, nevertheless began arranging its shards. The stubbornness of it made Anya dizzy. She walked away from the voices and returned to the place where the children's room had been. There, smeared against a bit of wall the fire had spared, a small handprint remained, made of soot and something brighter that might once have been berry juice. Her daughter's, she thought the size exactly right. She pressed her own palm over it and felt nothing but the grain of the wood. An impulse rose, a wild need to cut this piece out, to carry it with her like a relic. She did not trust her hands with a saw. Instead, she leaned her forehead against the print and let her body tremble until the trembling passed. Afternoon brought the wind back, a kinder cousin of the storm. It lifted the ash in little puffs and relocated grief, grain by grain. Anya helped where she could, handing a coil of rope, steadying a beam being dragged clear, carrying a tin cup to an old man who had lost a grandson and refused to sit. When people thanked her, she nodded. When they asked what she needed, she could not answer. Need had been replaced by a single fact. There was nothing left to need from this place, except what it could never return. By evening, the valley smelled less of smoke and more of wet earth. Somewhere, a child who had not died began to sing a nonsense song, as if to test whether sound could be reintroduced. Anya felt the weight of the ring in her pocket and touched it, a habit already forming. Rattan's name hovered on her tongue like a bird uncertain where to land. Marie came and sat beside her on the blanket. They said nothing for a while. At last Marie spoke. "The elders want to start a list. Names of the gone, names of the missing." "Missing is a soft word," Anya said, surprised at the grit in her voice. "Missing means lost where one could be found. This river does not misplace, it keeps." Marie's mouth tightened. "Even so, we must mark the living and the dead." Anya looked toward the water. It slid on, doing its ancient work. "Write his name," she said. "Write both, and write mine where it belongs." Marie turned, startled. "Where would you put it?" Anya let the question sit. She looked at the ash-smudged ground, at her smoky fingers, at the grey that had found a home in the lines of her skin. "Nowhere," she said finally, voice flat. "I'm not on either list yet." Marie reached for her hand. Anya allowed it. Warmth spread from that simple contact, fragile as a moth's wing. "You are here," Marie said. "Am I?" Anya asked, and did not wait for an answer. In the blue hour before night, the village lit small fires, gentle flames, carefully tended, as if no one wanted to provoke the larger, darker thing that had ruled the day before. Anya stood at the edge of what had been her doorway. She closed her eyes and tried to conjure the house from memory. The creak of the floorboard near the table, the shadow the beam threw across the wall at sunset, the way her children's footsteps mapped their own constellations across the room. The picture came easily, whole and perfect. Then she opened her eyes and saw the ruin overlay it like a transparency. For the first time, tears rose, not violent, not dramatic, but steady and astonished. She let them fall. They left clean tracks down her cheeks, two thin rivers disobeying the larger one. A woman in ashes watched the day end. She did not pray, not in any way that would have satisfied those who taught prayers. She stood and breathed, and in the breathing there was the smallest consent to continue. When the chill nudged her toward the blanket, she hesitated. Her gaze fell on the hill where she had held her son until the light went wrong. She climbed it again, slow, as if climbing back into a story she could not quite believe she had lived. At the small mound, she knelt. The soil had settled a little. She smoothed it with the back of her hand and set the ruined flower crown there, its collapsed ring a map of what would not be repaired. "I will not leave," she whispered to the mound, to the river, to the sky that had proven it could be enemy and roof. "But I don't know how to stay." The wind moved through the grass with a sound like a long exhale. Somewhere in that whisper, beneath the clang of hammers, beneath the list-making and the rebuilding and the restless, practical kindness of neighbors, a question began to form. It did not arrive as a sentence. It began as a bruise, a pressure. It would not be ignored. By the time she stood and returned to the small borrowed fire, the question had learned its words. "Why me?" She did not answer. There was no answer. There was only night, and a woman in ashes, and the beginning of a grief that would not be content with silence. Why me? The endless cry of sorrow did not arrive as a sentence for Anya. It seeped into her like cold, settling in joints and marrow, repeating without sound until every breath was shaped by it. In the days after the storm, people said the worst had passed. They meant the fire was out, the water had receded, the sky had turned back into sky. But the worst had only learned a quieter voice. It spoke in the mornings, when she woke and reached for a weight that was no longer beside her. It spoke in the afternoons, when her hands forgot and set places for small mouths that would never again ask for more. It spoke at night, when the lamp's thin flame drew a circle that could not keep out memory. Why me? Not shouted now, not torn from the throat as it had been on the hill, but breathed like a prayer that expected no God. The village moved with a new carefulness, as if the air itself might break. Men lifted beams, women cooked in common pots, children, those who still had mothers to call them inside, played soft games that used to be loud. The elders made lists, names of the gone, names of the missing, names of the living, which had never felt like a list one needed to make, until it did. Anya learned how to stand next to people who did not know where to put their eyes. They spoke to her as if she were made of thin glass. She answered like someone learning a language too late in life. Yes, no, thank you, I don't know. She ate because hands pressed bowls into her palms. She slept because exhaustion shoved her down. She rose because the sun did, and each task floated in the same dark water. Why me? Sometimes the question dressed itself in arithmetic. She counted accidents that could have broken differently, minutes that could have stretched or shrunk. If the lightning had missed, if the wind had paused, if the ladder had held, if her son had listened and stayed by her knee, if her daughter had not dreamed the dream that kept tugging at the edge of Anya's mind, the house was shaking, and I couldn't find you, would the girl have clung tighter? She made lines of cause and effect, noble in their uselessness, as if logic might grow hands and lift the past into a safer place. Other times the question wore blame like a cloak. It pointed fingers in circles that always returned to her. Why had she sent Ratan to the roof? Why had she not strapped the children to her own body with the scarf now stained and stiff? Why had she believed in a house just because it had held them yesterday? She tried to give the blame away. There was water enough to drown it, but it came back dry, patient, ready to stand the next watch. Mari came often. She brought small things, a cracked cup to drink from, a shawl washed and sun-warmed, a comb with missing teeth. She brought larger things without touching them, the presence of a witness who did not rush grief's river, who understood that some silences are not empty, only crowded. One evening, as the late light lay gold on the ruined beams, Mari sat down and said, "Today I asked, why her, about my sister, and the answer felt like a door that wouldn't open, so I just sat by the door." Anya nodded because the nod was honest. "I ask, why me? And it is not a door," she said at last. "It is a wall. Walls can be leaned on," Mari offered. Anya almost smiled. Almost. Not this one. At night, the question complicated itself. It multiplied into other forms. Why them, not me? Why both? Why all? She dreamed of taking their places, one by one, like a player in a cruel game of chairs where the music never stops, and there are always more chairs than bodies. She woke with her hands clawing at the blanket, nails full of threads, breath shaped into pleas that evaporated as soon as they reached the air. There were rituals. The village held them because people had to place their grief somewhere visible. Fires were lit, this time with care and distance, in circles where names were spoken and stones were stacked. Anya stepped into one circle and felt nothing. She stepped out and felt everything. The elders said words that had survived other storms, words about returning to the earth and to the story that was larger than any house. Anya listened and found no purchase. The story had taken her script and replaced it with blank pages. The boy's mound on the hill became a place her feet found without consulting her mind. She smoothed the soil until the soil no longer cared to be smoothed. She set pebbles, then set them again when wind or neighbors' children knocked them down, forgiving the small hands because the small hands existed. She tried to pray, and the only prayer that came was the question. The question asked itself, grew tired, and asked itself again, like a child who refuses sleep because sleep admits defeat. A day came when the river returned something that had belonged to Ratan. Not his body, no, not that, but the carved box that had held his father's knife. It floated down like a dark boat and wedged itself in a reed bed beyond the bend. Lorne's son found it and brought it to Anya with the reverence of a messenger. The lid had swollen and split. The inside was empty. The knife was already a rumor downstream. Anya took the box and held it to her chest. The question adjusted its shape. Why show me the shell and not the fruit? Why this reminder that everything that holds can be emptied? Why me to hold the emptiness? She did not weep then. Tears were a weather she did not control. They came in odd places. When a rooster crowed from a roof that was still a roof. When she saw a little girl refuse a spoonful of porridge and her mother laugh and offer it again. When a beam slid easily into its new bed, as if the house that would rise there had always existed and had merely been waiting its turn. People brought stories, the way they bring bread. Do you remember the time your boy raced my twins and let them win? Do you remember how Ratan danced like the sky had no weight? Do you remember your girl's crown of dandelions, the one she insisted was fit for a queen? The stories landed on Anya like migrating birds. Some rested a while and warmed her. Some pecked. Why me? Joined a less noble chorus at times, the chorus called envy. She listened to a neighbor sigh about a chicken lost and thought, your house stands, your children run. The thought shamed her. She folded it small. and hid it with the others she did not know where to place. On the fourth night she counted, because numbers were a frame that still held. Anya walked down to the river alone. The moon bruised the water with light. Frogs stitched the dark with their needle voices. She stood where the current could reach her ankles and spoke to it as if it were a person with a face. "Why me?" she said. The river answered in its language, which was the same answer it gave to reeds and stones and drowned branches. "Because I am river, because I go where fall and gravity say, because I was here before your house, and will be after your name." She knew the answer was not cruelty. The absence of intent can feel like cruelty to those who suffer. Her feet sank a little in the silt. The pull was real and persuasive. She took one step back and then another. She did not consider herself brave. She considered herself stubborn in a way that surprised her. She had been stubborn about harvests and schedules, and whether the porridge should be salted before or after boiling. Now she was stubborn about breath. "I will not give the river what it has not already taken," she thought, and the thought put a small stone beneath one foot, a different kind of footing. In the tent of canvas that was not a home, she lay on her side and let the question float above her like a ceiling. A memory visited the kind that arrives whole, without edges. Her son asleep with one hand on his chest, as if he were a guard for his own heart. Her daughter, murmuring made-up words to a doll whose head had been mended twice. Ratan, entering as dusk, chose the room, carrying the day's weariness like a prize he was happy to share. The memory hurt less sharply than the others. It hurt like a song you know by heart and can sing even while crying. She sang it silently until sleep took the second verse. Morning brought work. Marie insisted, not bossy, but firm, that Anya come to the line where bundles of salvaged wood were being sorted. "Your hands are still hands," she said. "Let them remember." Anya lifted, stacked, passed, received. The tasks braided the hours into something that looked, from certain angles, like a day. A boy who'd lost his father asked whether all fires were bad. Anya said no, and surprised herself with certainty. Some fires warm, some fires light, some fires eat only what must be eaten. She did not know if the boy believed her. She did not know if she believed herself. But for the length of that answer, the question fell quiet. It returned when the line of workers broke for stew. It returned when someone laughed, and then apologized for laughing, as if joy in the presence of ruin were an offense instead of a medicine. It returned when the sun slid behind a thin veil and the valley wore the color of bruises. Why me? Not to the storm now, but to whatever kept time. Why this lesson in loss for a woman who had asked only for small days? She caught herself looking for omens, the way a hungry person looks for crumbs. A crow landing on the same beam twice. The wind changing direction at the exact moment she spoke her boy's name aloud for the first time without breaking. The ring in her pocket warming when she stood in a particular patch of light. She knew the mind bargains. She let it bargain. If it could spend itself into silence for an hour, that was an hour of mercy. By the seventh evening, the question turned on its axis. Not softer, not kinder, but angled differently. Why me, and not you? Why me, and not the woman whose house stood? Why me, and also you, and also them? It became less singular, more plural, as if grief, like the river, had tributaries that joined whether the land approved or not. In that widening, a sliver of space opened where breath could sit without arguing the past. Anya did not notice the change as a change. She noticed that when Marie spoke of her sister again, Anya listened without measuring loss against loss, as if scales could matter. She noticed that when a child's cry skittered across the yard, she walked toward it instead of away. She noticed that when she touched the ring at dawn, she thought Ratan before she thought gone. The question did not disappear. It learned to share the room. It sat with her on the hill and did not block the view entirely. It lay beside her at night and allowed, now and then, a brief dream with no water in it. It accompanied her to the river and did not insist on being first to speak. When she returned from the bank one morning, a heron lifted and flapped away, slow as a page turning. "Why me?" she said aloud, for the 1,000th time. This time, the echo did not come back as a wall. It came back as a corridor, still long, still dim, but with the suggestion of an end that might not be a door so much as a bend. She could not see around it. She did not need to. She stood for a while and let the corridor exist. A woman in ashes breathed in, breathed out. The cry of sorrow did not end. It changed its pitch. Somewhere very far off, so far, she mistrusted her own ears. Another question gathered, one that did not accuse, but inquired. It would not speak clearly yet. It would not be gentle, but it would be different. For now, the river spoke, the wind answered, and the village hammered the day back into shape. Anya lifted one more board and felt her hands remember their craft. The illusion of control wore many faces, and Anya tried on each of them like garments against an unexpected winter. Some were woven of numbers, some of rituals, some of bargains whispered to no one. All of them promised one thing: if you do this exactly right, the world will do what you ask. None of them kept their promise for long. She began with order. Order was respectable. It didn't announce itself as superstition. At dawn she drew lines in the ash with a stick, mapping the outline of rooms that no longer existed. Here, the table. Here, the hearth. Here, the small bed where two children pretended to sleep and then erupted into giggles. She paced the perimeters the way a soldier patrols a fence. Her feet learned the old distances, and for a few minutes at a time, it felt like she had folded the past back into place. When a gust smeared her lines, she knelt to draw them again, slower, straighter, convincing herself that precision was a kind of prayer. She built a schedule the second day after the storm. Morning, clear nails from the debris. Midday, wash salvage in the stream. Afternoon, check the reeds beyond the bend. Evening, sit on the hill. Night, stay awake. It was not written anywhere. She carried it in her bones. If she completed each task, if she did not let the hours escape, perhaps the hours would return what they had taken. When Mari brought food off clock, Anya hesitated to accept it, as if eating at the wrong time might anger the invisible powers keeping score. At the boy's grave, she arranged pebbles by size, then by color, then by a pattern. She invented on the spot 2 light stones, 1 dark, 2 light, 1 dark. The wind changed nothing about the dead, but disturbed the pattern, and she took that as an insult she was obligated to answer. She reset the stones with a patience that looked like devotion. A child with tired eyes watched her from the path and said nothing. Anya did not notice him leave. There were rules about the river, too. She would only stand at the water when the sun was at 2 fingers above the ridge. If she arrived early, she walked a slow circle until the minute felt right. She believed, without deciding to, that the current listened more carefully then. She offered the river small things, A thread from her hair, a leaf that her daughter would have chosen, a piece of charcoal rubbed until her fingers blackened tokens in a game the river had not agreed to play. "Bring him back," she whispered. "Bring her back, bring me back." The water moved, and the movement itself became a reply she read like omens. At night she refused sleep, as if keeping vigil were a payment the world demanded in exchange for mercy. She made bargains in the dark. 5 nights awake, and you bring me a sign. 10 nights, and you return a body. 12, and you return a life. When her body betrayed her with an hour of unconsciousness, she woke furious with herself. Sure, she had missed the moment the river had chosen to return its due. She punished the disobedient flesh by denying it bread. Control, she thought, could be carved from hunger. She guarded language. She did not say certain words in certain places. She never spoke Ratan's name within sight of the broken table. It felt like placing his memory on a trap. She would not say "daughter" in the reeds. She told herself she was being careful with sacred things. The truth. She believed syllables had edges and could cut the wrong way if turned at the wrong angle. People reached for her the way hands reach for a falling plate. She pulled away before they could steady her. Dependence felt like another failure, and she had decided without trial, without jury, that failure had cost her everything. Lorne offered to repair the fence along the bank. She refused, as if a fence erected by another's hands would invite a second flood. Mari suggested Anya sleep in her house until the elders placed families in the new shelters. Anya said no with a softness that hurt to hear. She stacked salvaged wood until splinters freckled her palms, proof she was still the author of something. Control, she discovered, had a cousin called explanation. She hunted it with the zeal of a convert. If she could outline the chain lightning to flame, flame to smoke, smoke to panic, panic to ladder, she could store the chain in some mental shed and label it. This is how it happened. It will not happen again. She made lists of what would be different. She would keep buckets by the door. She would oil the ladder. She would teach the children a game in which they moved to the loft and back against a drumbeat until their bodies could do it blind. It was a fine list, brilliant, comprehensive, and entirely addressed to a future that did not exist. On the 5th day, she found a spool of thread in the ruins, half charred, half bright. It was the color of wheat. She carried it to the canvas shelter and decided to repair her scarf where the storm had torn it. The thread slipped like water through the needle's eye on the first try. An omen, she decided, though she scolded herself for deciding it. She began to stitch and felt relief in the small obedience of cloth. Then the thread snagged on a burr in the weave and knotted into a stubborn, hard fist. She coaxed it. It tightened. She pulled. It broke. She stared at the two ends so close, so useless, and laughed, the sound startling in her throat. Control was like that, smooth until it wasn't, obedient until the smallest imperfection turned it into a snare. Envy visited again, disguised as common sense. She watched 2 men raise a frame for a neighbor's new shelter and thought, they chose a place farther from the river. They were wise. We were fools. She rewrote the map of everything she had ever done to include better decisions she had not made. She redrew history until it looked like a prophecy she had ignored. The illusion did not comfort. It only added weight. Sometimes the world mocked her gently. One afternoon, clouds gathered without menace, fat, white, theatrical. Anya stood in the field and lifted her hands the way she had seen elders do, in rare prayers for rain. She whispered, "Stop," to the sky, just to test it. The wind thinned, the clouds slowed, the performance paused. She felt absurd power stroll through her chest. "Stop," she said again, firmer. The sun leaned out as if to humor her. She almost smiled at the sky, as if they had agreed to something. An hour later a gust came and shouldered the show along. It rained on the next valley, because that was where the air was ready to let go. She bent and pressed her palms to the ground, and laughed a brittle, bright laugh that drew Marie from the path. "What is it?" Marie asked. "I told the sky to listen," Anya said, wiping her eyes. "It pretended to." Marie did not return the laugh. "Sometimes pretending is kindness." Anya shook her head. "Sometimes it's cruelty. If she could not control the sky or the river, she would control the smaller gods: cleanliness, order, silence." She swept the packed dirt around her canvas shelter, as if emperors might visit. She washed her hands before touching the ring in her pocket. She sat at the edge of village circles and refused to interrupt anyone, the way one refuses to stir a sleeping dog. When a child tripped and scraped a knee, she stood so fast her head rang, then forced herself not to run, as if refusing the body's first answer could teach the world a better one. The body has its own rebellion. Once, lifting a beam she had no business lifting, her shoulder jolted and a sharp heat ran down her arm. She set the wood down and waited for the fire in the muscle to spend itself. It did not. Pain became another clock she could not wind. That night she tried to discipline it with breath. 4 in, 7 hold, 8 out numbers Marie swore by when the world remembered her sister. It helped a little, then helped less, then not at all, and still she breathed to the count, because the counting was a fence, and fences, even broken ones, mark a place. A small boy, Lorne's youngest, appeared with a crooked bouquet of weeds, and told her he had dreamed of a house that floated. "It had ropes," he explained solemnly. "You tie it so the river can't steal." Anya thanked him and took the weeds as if they were flowers. That night she dreamed of ropes that reached the moon, and she woke angrier at the moon than she had any right to be. The elders finally pressed the question, "Where will you sleep when the cold comes?" She wanted to answer, "In the past," but the past did not have windows she could close. She said, "Here," meaning wherever my losses can find me. They offered a corner in the long shelter by the mill. "Only until your own walls stand," they promised. The promise had the shape of control, a plan, a sequence, a future that could be arranged in blocks. She nodded, and the nod felt like surrender and relief braided together. On the day she moved her little lamp and her 2 salvaged objects, the ring and the flute, to the mill shelter, she passed a girl the same height as her daughter. The child wore a dress, the same stubborn yellow. Anya's breath left her without her permission. She stepped sideways into shadow and held herself together with both hands. When the girl's mother turned, the child's face was different, and the difference undid Anya as thoroughly as likeness would have. Control is not only the attempt to fix the world, it is the attempt to fix the heart's schedule. The heart refused. By late week the schedules and bargains and patterns had frayed, not failed, frayed. She still drew room lines some mornings, but she let the wind erase them without argument. She still arranged the pebbles, but when a child's heels scattered them, she did not kneel right away. She still went to the river at 2 fingers of sun, but if a neighbor's voice detained her, she did not read it as an omen, only as a voice. And yet the fight against destiny did not end. It changed its instrument. She found herself arguing with words like karma and fate, the way one argues with a fence post, furious not to convince, furious to burn the energy that otherwise would burn her. "Don't you dare tell me there is a reason," she snapped to a man who had offered none. "Don't you dare say everything happens for the best." He hadn't, but the phrases prowled the edge of conversations like feral dogs, and she chased them away preemptively. At dusk she returned to the hill, the place where the world had split. She sat with her back against the ground and let the sky do its old work. The illusion of control settled beside her, less a tyrant now than a tired companion with whom she had shared a long, unproductive shift. She did not dismiss it, she did not bow to it. She let it be what it was, a human response to an inhuman event, a spell cast by fear and love at the same time. Wind and time braided the grass, a moth stitched the air. Anya touched the ring, and, for the first time since the storm, said Ratan's name aloud without swallowing it with the same breath. It did not summon him, it did not undo anything. It did, however, sound like a note that might belong to a song not yet written. The illusion had not saved her. It had kept her moving until movement belonged to her again. In the margin that opened, a new habit crept in, talking to the empty spaces as if they were occupied, asking questions whose answers would not come from sky or river, but from the shadows that pooled at the edges of lamplight. The nights stretched longer than the days, not because of the sun, but because the darkness carried voices. They were not the voices of neighbors or of wind rattling the canvas walls. They were the voices that lived behind Anya's ribs, voices that waited until the world fell quiet to whisper. She came to call them shadows, not just the silhouettes cast by lamplight, but shapes of thought and memory that clung to her like smoke. At first, she tried to silence them. She pressed her palms over her ears, buried her head under the blanket, whispered prayers without believing them. But the shadows were patient. They did not need her belief to survive. They needed only her silence. So, one night, exhausted from fighting what could not be fought, she answered them. "Why did you let us go?" one shadow asked. Its tone was small, childish, plaintive. It wore her daughter's shape, though she could not see her daughter's face. "I didn't," Anya whispered back, her throat dry. I tried with everything." "Not enough," the shadow accused. She curled inward, clutching the ring in her pocket. "I failed," she admitted, the words cutting her as they left her. The shadow did not deny it. It only stared with eyes she could not see. Another night, the voice of her son came, though older than he had ever been in life. It was deep, solemn, the kind of voice that should have belonged to a man carrying firewood on his shoulders. "You promised to keep us safe." "I know," she said, her breath hitched. "I thought love was enough to keep you safe. I thought my arms were strong. Love is not a shield." She closed her eyes. "Then what is?" The shadow did not answer. Perhaps it could not. Perhaps it wanted her to find the answer alone. Her husband's shadow came rarely, but when it did, it was the heaviest. He did not ask questions. He stood in silence, watching her. She imagined his arms folded the way they had been when he disagreed with her about planting schedules, his lips pressed tight in a line of stubbornness. "Speak," she begged him once. "Blame me, curse me, tell me what I should have done. Anything but this silence." But the shadow gave her nothing. And in the nothing, she heard more than words. Disappointment, distance, the impossibility of forgiveness. There were other voices, stranger ones, less tethered to the dead. They were fragments of herself, cracked mirrors. One hissed, "If you had not laughed that afternoon, the gods might have spared you." Another sneered, "If you had been less proud, less sure, less stubborn, the river would have gone around you." A third whispered, gentle but cruel, "You are alive because you deserve to suffer more than they did." She argued with them until her throat burned. She tried reason, she tried anger, she tried bargaining. None of it worked. The shadows shifted tactics, turning her defenses into new weapons. When she wept, they said, "See, you prove our point." When she stayed silent, they said, "Silence is guilt." When she prayed, they said, "Your God does not listen." Yet amid the cruelty, something unexpected happened. One night, after she had exhausted herself shouting at shadows, a quieter voice slipped in. It sounded like her own, but older, steadier. "Perhaps the shadows are not your enemies," it said. She almost laughed. "They tear me apart." "They are you," the voice replied simply. The thought struck her like cold water. She had been fighting herself. Every accusation, every blade, every whisper, it was the echo of her own grief, her own guilt, her own longing turned against her. And suddenly, the conversations changed. The next time her daughter's shadow asked, "Why did you let us go?" Anya placed her hand on her chest and said, "Because I am not a god. I am only a mother. I held you as long as I could." When her son's voice said, "You promised to keep us safe," she answered, "Yes, I promised, and I failed. But failure is not the whole of me." When her husband's silence pressed against her, she whispered, "If you will not forgive me, then I will learn to forgive myself." The words felt like theft, like daring to take what she had not been given, but they also felt like a key, even if the lock had not yet appeared. The crueler shadows still came. They still hissed, still mocked. But now she spoke back with questions of her own. "Why must suffering mean punishment?" she asked. "Why must love always succeed at protecting? Why is being alive a crime?" The shadows had no answers. They recoiled, faded, reformed weaker, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, silence followed that was not heavy or cruel, silence that felt like space. One evening, as she sat at the riverbank, she saw her own reflection ripple in the water. The shadows gathered around her, as they always did, and one hissed, "You are alone." "No," she said softly, watching the water tremble. "I am speaking to you, aren't I?" Alone people do not speak. The reflection blurred, the shadow quieted, and for the first time since the storm, she heard something beneath the voices, the steady rhythm of her own breath. It was not peace, not yet. But it was the beginning of a different kind of conversation, one where she was no longer only the accused, but also the witness, the questioner, the judge, and perhaps, someday, the forgiver. Memories did not visit Anya like gentle ghosts. They came like knives, sharp and sudden, cutting into her when she least expected it. Each one arrived uninvited, glinting with the cruel precision of truth, and left her bleeding silently inside. The first knife came in the form of a smell. One afternoon, as she sat among the villagers weaving salvaged reeds into mats, a pot of rice boiled over nearby. The steam curled into the air, carrying with it the faint sweetness of scorched grain. In an instant, she was no longer weaving but standing in her kitchen, scolding her daughter for leaning too close to the fire, laughing as the girl made faces at the smoke. The laughter was so vivid she swore she heard it, clear as bells. Then the memory shifted abrupt, merciless, and she remembered the child's screams on the night of the storm. The sweetness in the air turned acrid, like burnt flesh, and the mat in her hands split apart under the force of her trembling. Another knife carved itself from sound. A boy in the village was playing a flute, the same kind of cheap reed instrument Ratan had promised to teach their son. The notes rose clumsy, uneven, full of mistakes. Anya's chest tightened. For a moment she smiled, imagining her boy puffing his cheeks, laughing when no sound came out. But as quickly as the joy came, the knife turned. She remembered the flute that had floated downstream, its wood swollen, its song drowned. The laughter of the living boy became unbearable, and Anya pressed her palms to her ears until the music was nothing but blood pounding in her skull. The knives came in sleep, too. Dreams were not refuge, they were ambushes. She would dream of walking into her old house, everything intact, the table set for supper. Ratan would look up, smiling tiredly, his hand resting on their daughter's head. Her son would shout, "Mama, you're late," and the room would fill with warmth so real she could taste it. Then, without warning, the roof would cave in, water roaring down, fire clawing up, voices screaming her name as she reached for hands that dissolved into smoke. She would wake choking, the canvas walls of her new shelter closing around her like a tomb. Sleep became something to fear, not something to crave. The cruelest knives were the smallest, a yellow ribbon tangled in the grass where children now played, a set of tiny footprints in mud after a rain, a shard of mirror that reflected her face and, for one dizzying second, seemed to show her daughter's eyes instead. Each fragment cut her with the reminder that life continued, shamelessly, as if her loss had not been absolute. Anya tried to dull the knives with tasks. She carried stones, mended nets, swept dirt. But the knives lived in the gaps between one breath and the next, between one heartbeat and the next. When she let her guard slip, even for a moment, they slid in. Once, Marie found her kneeling on the hill, both hands clutching the soil until her nails broke and bled. "They are gone," Anya whispered, "but they live sharper now than when they breathed. Every memory cuts me open." Marie, who had her own ghosts, laid a hand on Anya's shoulder. "Knives can carve," she said softly, "or they can wound. We don't always get to choose." But Anya shook her head. "These knives don't carve, they only tear." That night, sitting by the river, she stared into the current until her eyes blurred. "Why do you return their objects?" she murmured, "but not their laughter? Why do you give me broken boxes, drowned flutes, but never their hands?" The river, as always, offered no answer but movement. The knives of memory taught her a bitter truth. Grief was not only about absence, it was also about presence of sights, smells, sounds, too sharp to bear. Loss was not emptiness, it was overfull, overflowing, cutting her from the inside with every reminder of what once was. And yet, hidden within that truth, was a seed she could not yet see. For though the knives cut, they also kept her tethered to those she loved. Pain was proof that love had not ended. But Anya was not ready to hear that yet. For now, the knives ruled her nights and days, and she braced herself for each strike, as if living meant nothing more than surviving blade after blade. The knives of memory had left Anya raw, trembling, her body alive only as a container of pain. But on the 7th night after the storm, something shifted. It was not loud, it was not miraculous, it was small, like the sound of a single reed bending in the wind, fragile but clear. Anya sat by the river again, as she always did, clutching her knees. The moon was a thin silver blade, slicing the darkness without effort. She had whispered all her questions into the current. Why me? Why them? What did I do wrong? As always, the river gave no answer, only its endless flowing. But that night, between one breath and the next, she noticed something she had never noticed before. The water did not cling to what it carried. It touched the branches, the leaves, the ash, and then let them go. It did not fight to hold or to hoard. It received, it carried, it released. For the first time since the fire and flood, she wondered if she could be like the river. A memory surfaced, not one of knives, but one of her father long ago, speaking to her when she was a girl, afraid of losing her toys. He had said, "Child, even your breath does not belong to you. It comes, it goes. Try to hold it too long, and it will choke you. Let it go, and it returns, again and again." That is how life is. She had forgotten those words. Now they returned, not as a knife, but as a whisper. And in that whisper, Anya thought she heard something larger than memory, a teaching, subtle and steady, like a presence at the edge of her grief. The next day, while searching among the ruins for scraps of wood, she found an old monk standing by the river bend. He was not from her village. His robes were travel-worn, his staff weathered by many roads. He watched the water with the same stillness she had felt the night before. "You look at the river as if it holds your answers," the monk said gently, his voice carrying no demand. "It took everything from me," Anya whispered. "My children, my husband, my home." The monk nodded. "Yes, the river takes, but do you see, it also gives. Look," he pointed at the water, where shoots of green had already sprouted along the wet banks, nourished by the flood. Loss and life move together. One is not without the other. Anya stared, trembling. "But how do I live with what I have lost?" The monk's eyes softened. "The Buddha taught, all that is born will pass. To cling is to suffer. To see impermanence is not to deny love, but to love without chains." The words were not loud, not forced. They were like the river itself, flowing softly into her, neither demanding nor denying. That night, alone again, she closed her eyes. She imagined the whispers of her shadows, the knives of memory, the river's current. For the first time, she did not fight them. She breathed in, held for a moment, and let go. Her grief did not vanish. Her heart still ached, but into the silence, she whispered back to herself, "If all things flow, then even sorrow flows. If love is not destroyed by loss, then I carry them still." It was not peace, not yet, but it was a seed of Dharma planted in the soil of her shattered life, a seed that whispered, "You can learn to live again. You can learn to walk forward, not away from them, but with them inside you." And for the first time since the storm, Anya slept not dreamless, not without tears, but with breath that rose and fell like the river itself. The morning after her first night of unbroken sleep, Anya woke with a start, surprised by the softness of her own breath. She was not healed, not even close, but something inside had loosened like a knot pulled ever so slightly apart. For the first time since the storm, she noticed the dawn light filtering through the canvas with more than dread. She rose, clutching the ring that had never left her palm, and stepped toward the river bend. There, as though the world itself had placed him in her path, the old monk was waiting. His robes were patched, worn thin at the edges, dyed a faded saffron that looked as if it had traveled further than any man's legs should have allowed. His eyes, though, carried a stillness that unnerved her more than any storm. They were not blank, they were awake. Anya hesitated, afraid to disturb him, but the monk lifted his gaze and spoke first. "You returned," he said, as though he had expected her. "I couldn't stay away," she admitted. Her voice trembled. "The river still terrifies me, but it also calls me." The monk nodded. "That is how truth works. It frightens because it strips away illusions. But it also calls because something deep within knows it is home." They walked together in silence for a while, following the river's current. Anya's mind filled with questions she had been too weary to form before. Finally, she let one spill out. "Why did this happen to me?" The monk stopped walking. He planted his staff in the soil and turned to face her. "That is the wrong question." Her breath caught in her throat. "Then what is the right one?" "What now?" he said gently. "You cannot change the fire. You cannot call back the water. But you can choose what grows from the ashes. Suffering is the seed of either despair or wisdom. Which will you water?" His words landed inside her like stones tossed into a deep well. She wanted to argue, to scream that wisdom could never replace the arms of her children, the voice of her husband. But her throat closed around the anger, and instead she whispered, "I don't know how to live anymore." The monk's expression softened. "Then that is where you begin, not knowing. From there the path is clear." He told her to sit. Reluctantly, Anya lowered herself onto the damp grass. The monk sat opposite her, his staff laid across his knees. "Close your eyes," he instructed. She hesitated. Closing her eyes had always meant seeing the knives of memory, the shadows waiting in the dark. But something in his calm tone disarmed her, and she obeyed. "Breathe," he said. "Do not force the breath. Do not trap it. Let it come. Let it go." She inhaled shakily. The air entered her chest, and for a moment she held it, afraid. Then, as he guided her, she let it go. The release was painful, like dropping the last rope holding her family to her, but it was also relief. "Again," he murmured. She repeated it. Breath in, breath out. The river echoed the rhythm, a current that had always been moving, indifferent to storms, indifferent to loss. "You see," the monk whispered, "the river does not cling, it carries. You too can carry without chains. Your grief will not vanish, but it can flow." Tears streamed down her face, but they were quieter tears than the ones that had once torn her apart. She opened her eyes, staring at the monk through blurred vision. Is this peace?" He shook his head gently. "Number. This is practice. Peace is not a gift that arrives at your door. It is built, breath by breath, moment by moment, like weaving a basket, like sowing a field. Every thread, every seed matters." Anya pressed the ring in her hand until the metal left an imprint in her skin. For the first time, she thought, perhaps I can carry their memory without breaking under it. The monk rose, leaning on his staff. "Come back tomorrow," he said simply. "We will walk again, and perhaps one day you will see that what you lost has become the soil for something new." Anya watched him disappear along the river path. She did not know his name, did not know where he had come from, but she felt, for the first time since the storm, that she was no longer entirely alone. That night, when she lay beneath the canvas shelter, the shadows returned, as they always did. They whispered of guilt, of failure, of promises broken. But this time she breathed as the monk had shown her, in and out. The shadows did not vanish, but their edges dulled. The knives became less sharp, and as her body sank into rest, she heard another whisper, softer, steadier. It was not from the shadows. It was not from her grief. It was the echo of the monk's words, echoing like the current of the river. You cannot change the fire. You cannot call back the water. But you can choose what grows from the ashes. For the first time in many nights, Anya closed her eyes willingly. The next morning, the air smelled of wet grass and new beginnings. Though the village still carried wounds, broken huts, empty beds, half-dug graves, there was also movement. Women fetching water, children searching for firewood, men lifting timbers. Life, fragile as it was, had returned to its rhythm. Anya walked slowly to the river, her heart still heavy, but her steps steadier than the day before. The old monk was already there, seated on a flat stone, his eyes closed, his staff resting beside him. He did not open his eyes when she approached, but his lips curved into a knowing smile. "You came," he said softly. "I told you I don't know how to live," Anya whispered, "but I want to learn." The monk nodded and gestured for her to sit. She folded her legs on the damp earth, the river's low murmur filling the silence between them. After a long pause, the monk opened his eyes and began to speak. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of generations. "There is a story," he said, "that has traveled with me through many villages. It is the story of Kisa Gotami, a woman who lived in the Buddha's time. She was young, newly married, and gave birth to a son. She loved him more than her own breath. But one day, her son grew ill and died in her arms." Anya stiffened, her chest tightening. The monk's words pierced her, but she did not look away. Blinded by grief, Kisa Gotami carried her son's body from house to house, begging for medicine. "Please, heal him," she cried. But each house shook their heads. No one could bring back the dead. At last, she went to the Buddha himself. She fell at his feet, weeping, demanding, "Give me medicine for my son. You are wise. You must know how to cure him." The monk's eyes softened as he glanced at Anya. The Buddha looked upon her with great compassion. He said, "Yes, there is a cure. But first, bring me a handful of mustard seeds from a family that has never known death." Anya's breath caught. Kisa Gotami ran with hope. She knocked on every door. Each family gave her mustard seeds willingly, but when she asked, "Has death never touched your home?" they bowed their heads. One had lost a father, another a sister, another a husband. Everywhere death had left its mark. By nightfall, her basket was full of mustard seeds, but not one from a house untouched by loss. The monk's voice grew quieter. She returned to the Buddha and fell at his feet, sobbing. "I see now," she said, "death is not mine alone. Death comes to every house." The Buddha lifted her gently and said, "Impermanence is the nature of all things. To cling is to suffer. To see this is to begin freedom." From that day, she became his disciple, her grief transformed into compassion for all who suffer. The river gurgled as though affirming the tale. Anya's eyes blurred with tears. So even she lost her child. "Yes," the monk said gently, "even she, and countless others. Loss is not punishment, it is the law of life. Like the rising and falling of breath, like the flowing of this river, you are not singled out by fate. You are joined to humanity by what you endure. Anya pressed the ring in her palm, her knuckles white. But knowing others suffer, it doesn't bring them back. The monk nodded. It does not. But it shows you that your pain is not meaningless. You can walk with others who suffer, and in walking together, the weight becomes lighter. Compassion grows from shared sorrow. For a long while, Anya stared at the current. She imagined Kisa Gotami knocking on doors, weeping with each family who had known death. She imagined her own house among them, her own children's names added to the endless tally of grief. And for the first time she realized she was not cursed, she was not singled out, she was simply human. Her shoulders slumped, not from despair, but from release. She whispered, almost to herself, "Impermanence means nothing lasts, not joy, not sorrow, not even this pain." The monk smiled faintly. "You begin to see. To understand impermanence is not to give up love. It is to love more deeply, knowing it cannot be held forever. To weep when it is gone, and then to let the tears become rivers that water compassion." Anya closed her eyes. The shadows were still there, the knives still waiting, but beneath them she felt a new current stirring not only of grief, but of truth. And in that truth, she heard again the whisper she had felt the night before. Let go, flow, begin again. Anya sat in silence long after the monk's parable had ended. The sound of the river carried his words deeper into her than she could have imagined. Impermanence is the nature of all things. She repeated it silently, as though testing the shape of the truth on her tongue. But accepting it was another matter. Her heart rebelled. Her arms still ached with emptiness. The memory of laughter that had once filled her home stabbed at her like an unhealed wound. "I hear your words," she whispered at last, her voice strained. "But how do I accept that my children are gone? How do I accept that my husband will never return?" Knowing impermanence feels like knowing poison exists. It doesn't make it easier to swallow. The monk watched her with patient eyes. Acceptance is not agreement. It is not approval. It is simply saying, "This has happened. This is real." Denial is what multiplies the suffering. Acceptance allows the wound to breathe. Anya shook her head, trembling. "If I accept it, doesn't that mean I let them go?" The monk leaned closer, his voice lowered to a whisper that seemed to blend with the river. "To accept is not to abandon. You cannot lose what was never truly yours to keep. Their lives were gifts, flowing into your arms for a time. To cling is to suffer. To accept is to honor that gift, and then let it return to the river." Anya closed her eyes, clutching the ring so hard it cut into her palm. The thought of opening her hand, of loosening her grip even slightly, terrified her. But she remembered the story of Kisa Gotami, the mustard seeds, the empty basket, the realization that death touched every home. She realized she had been carrying not just her children, but the illusion that love should have shielded them from impermanence. Her body shook as tears streamed freely. "I thought if I held tightly enough, I could protect them. I thought my love could keep them alive." The monk nodded gently. "That is the greatest illusion. Love does not prevent death, but it transforms what death cannot touch. Love becomes compassion, memory, strength. You do not lose them. You carry them differently." For the first time, Anya unclenched her fist. She opened her palm and stared at the small ring, pressing a red mark into her skin. The sight broke her, yet it also softened her. She whispered to the ring as if speaking to her husband, I cannot keep you. I cannot keep any of you, but I will not let the pain be the only thing that remains." The monk smiled. "That is acceptance, not forgetting, not discarding, simply making peace with what already is." That night, as Anya lay in her shelter, the knives of memory still came. The shadows still whispered. But when they accused her, "You failed, you lost, you let go," she answered with a new voice. "Yes," she said quietly. "I failed, I lost, and they are gone. That is the truth. But it is no longer my punishment, it is my path." And in that small surrender, the suffocating grip of grief loosened, not gone, not erased, but no longer a chain pulling her deeper. For the first time, she felt she could breathe without drowning. The day after she dared to unclench her fist, Anya returned to the monk at the riverbank. The water shimmered in the sunlight, carrying fragments of leaves and driftwood past their feet, as if it had been waiting for her all along. She sat quietly, not speaking at first. Her chest was tight with exhaustion, but her heart was no longer in open rebellion. It was raw, tender, but ready to listen. The monk studied her with kind eyes. "You are beginning to see that fighting what is already gone only deepens the wound," he said softly. "Now it is time to learn how to sit with what remains." Anya frowned. "What remains is only pain." "Not only pain," the monk corrected gently, "also breath, the simplest, the most overlooked, the one thing that has never abandoned you. Will you sit and notice it with me?" They both lowered themselves onto the grass, the earth still damp from the night's dew. The monk's staff lay across his knees, steady as an anchor. He closed his eyes and spoke in a rhythm that matched the river. "Close your eyes. Feel the air. Enter your body. Do not force it. Do not chase it. Simply notice." Anya hesitated, afraid of the shadows that always came in darkness. But she remembered how, the night before, her voice had answered the knives. Yes, this is truth, but it is no longer punishment. That memory gave her courage. She closed her eyes. At first, everything inside her screamed with noise, the images of fire, her children's cries, her husband's silence. But through it all, she felt something steady, her chest rising, her chest falling. "In," the monk whispered, "and out. Do not hold. Do not push away. Breathe like the river, accept, carry, release." Her breath quivered. She tried again, in and out. She realized she had always treated breath as survival, something to cling to desperately, like a swimmer above a drowning sea. Now she was asked simply to notice it, like watching the tide return to the shore. For a moment, grief pushed against her ribs, demanding attention. "You have lost everything," it hissed. But the monk's voice reminded her, "Notice the breath." She breathed, in, out, and in that brief instant, the grief did not vanish, but it loosened its grip, as if grief itself had exhaled. Tears slid down her cheeks. "Is this peace?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The monk's eyes remained closed, but his smile was gentle. "It is a beginning. Peace is not a mountain you climb once and conquer. It is each step, each breath. This one you feel. Now it is enough for this moment. Tomorrow you will need another and another. But this first one is the seed." Anya pressed the ring in her palm, but felt less desperate. She could still cry, but she could also breathe. For the first time since the storm, she realized those two things could exist together, tears and breath, sorrow and stillness. As the session ended, she opened her eyes to see the river flowing endlessly, unconcerned with her pain, yet somehow carrying it too. The monk rose and tapped his staff gently against the ground. "Remember," he said, "you are not asked to erase what has happened. You are asked only to breathe through it. The river carries your sorrow. You carry your breath. Both are enough." That night, when the shadows gathered, Anya still wept, but she also breathed slow and steady until the knives dulled into shapes she could simply watch. Her body, heavy with exhaustion, eased into rest. For the first time, sleep did not arrive as an enemy. It arrived as a gentle guest, and in her last waking thought, she whispered, "Perhaps I can live with this. Perhaps breath is enough." The morning sun broke through the mist like a gentle hand parting a veil. Anya awoke, not with dread but with a strange calm, fragile yet undeniable. Her body was still sore, her heart still heavy, but she no longer felt like a ghost moving through ashes. Something had shifted. She sat by the river as the monk had taught her, breathing in, breathing out. Each breath was a small surrender, each exhale a letting go. The grief remained, but it no longer ruled her. For the first time, she noticed the way the light struck the water, how the ripples danced like threads of silver weaving a new fabric of the day. When the monk appeared, staff in hand, he studied her quietly before speaking. "You are different this morning," he said. Anya nodded. "The pain is still here, but last night I breathed through it. It did not crush me." "That is enough," the monk said. "Peace does not arrive whole. It arrives in fragments like shards of pottery that, when mended with care, make something more beautiful than before." They walked together along the river's edge. Anya's steps were hesitant, but they carried purpose. For days she had only drifted, letting sorrow decide her every motion. Now, though trembling, she chose her pace. At one point she stopped, staring at the ring in her hand. The old reflex came the urge to clutch it until her skin bruised. But instead she held it gently, as if recognizing it for what it was, a reminder, not a chain. "I thought I had to die with them," she whispered. "That life was over the night they were taken. But breathing has shown me something else. I cannot bring them back. But I can carry them differently inside my steps, inside my kindness, inside my choice to live." The monk bowed his head. "Then you are choosing life again." That evening, she returned to the village, not as a woman broken beyond repair, but as one slowly mending. She helped Murray gather herbs, held the hand of a child who had also lost her mother, and sat with elders by the fire. She did not speak much, but her presence was steadier, no longer a void of despair but a quiet well of endurance. When she lay down that night, the shadows returned, as always, but this time she faced them. "Yes," she told them softly, "you are part of me, but you are not all of me. I choose to live." And the shadows, hearing this, seemed less powerful, dissolving into the edges of her breath. For Anya, choosing life again was not a sudden victory. It was not triumph over suffering. It was a decision repeated each morning, each night, to step forward even with her grief. Her heart whispered, "The river flows, and so must I." The seasons did not pause for grief. Slowly, inevitably, the world moved forward. The rains lessened, the earth dried, and small patches of green began to reappear along the charred hillsides. The village, once drowned in silence, began to stir again like a body waking from a long coma. Anya watched it all unfold from the edge of her makeshift shelter. At first, she felt like a ghost, separate from the pulse of the community. She saw Marie carrying baskets of wild roots, old Tom hammering salvaged wood into new beams, children gathering by the river to play again, their laughter thin but insistent, like the fragile shoots of grass that dared to pierce through ash. And then, one morning, Marie called to her, "Come, Anya, the fields won't clear themselves." Anya froze. For so long she had thought herself incapable of helping anyone. Her grief had convinced her she was useless, a hollow shell of a woman. But Marie's voice held no pity, no hesitation, only expectation, as though Anya still belonged. When she took the hoe into her hands, her palms trembled. The earth beneath was hard, compacted by rain and loss. Each strike sent a jolt through her body, yet Marie worked beside her, humming softly, and gradually something began to shift. The rhythm of digging, the smell of turned soil, the sight of seeds dropping into furrows, it all felt like a conversation with life itself. Other villagers joined them. One brought water, another carried baskets of grain. Slowly, the field filled with people scarred, weary but together. For the first time since the storm, Anya was not alone. Later that week, she joined a small circle around the fire. The villagers told stories not of tragedy, but of resilience. Old Tom spoke of how his father rebuilt after a flood decades ago. A young woman shared how she survived losing her first child, and how she found the strength to raise the next. Each voice was rough with sorrow, yet each carried a current of endurance. Anya did not speak that night, but she listened, and in listening she discovered something unexpected. Her grief was not diminished by hearing theirs, it was held. She realized she had been carrying her pain like a stone in her chest, believing it was hers alone. But around the fire, among others who had also lost, the stone grew lighter. The monk's words returned to her. Compassion grows from shared sorrow. Days stretched into weeks. Anya began to notice subtle changes in herself. She laughed once when a child tugged at her skirt, surprising herself with the sound. She sang absent-mindedly as she cleaned a basket of herbs. She even dreamed not of the fire, but of a sunrise over fields yet to be planted. Grief still returned, often and fiercely, but now it met her in the company of others. When she wept, she no longer hid. A neighbor's hand would reach for hers, silent but steady. And in that small act, Anya felt the truth of what she had begun to understand. Suffering isolates only when it is hidden. When shared, it becomes a bridge. One evening, the monk joined the villagers at the fire. His presence was quiet, but it carried weight, like the roots of a tree anchoring the earth. When he spoke, his words were simple. Community is not the absence of sorrow. It is the weaving of many sorrows into one fabric, so that none must bear the whole weight alone. Anya looked around the circle, faces lined by tragedy, eyes still haunted, but hearts beating together. She felt something stir in her chest. It was not joy, not yet, but it was belonging. And for the first time since she had lost everything, she whispered to herself, "I am still part of life." Anger had always lingered like a shadow behind Anya's grief. It was quieter now, dulled by the rhythm of breath and the comfort of community, but it still burned when memories struck raw. Some nights, when the children's laughter echoed too vividly in her mind, fury welled up, fury at the storm that had taken them, at the gods she once prayed to, at fate itself for being so merciless. One evening, as the fire crackled low and the villagers began to drift into sleep, Anya remained awake, her heart restless. The monk sat nearby, staring at the flames. She finally whispered, her voice harsh with shame, "I am angry. Even after everything you've taught me, even after breathing, after sitting by the river, after working in the fields, I am still angry. Does that mean I've failed?" The monk turned to her, his eyes, glinting with firelight, softened. "Number, it means you are honest. Anger is not failure, it is a wound calling for attention. To deny it would only make it fester." He leaned forward, tossing a small branch into the flames. "Tell me, Anya, at whom is your anger aimed?" She hesitated. The words tumbled out before she could censor them. "At life, at the storm, at myself, at everything. Sometimes at the ones I lost, because they left me." Her voice broke, and she covered her face in shame. The monk nodded slowly. "All natural. Anger is born when the heart demands the world to be other than it is. You wanted permanence where there was impermanence. You wanted control where there was none. Anger is your protest against reality." Anya dropped her hands. "Then what do I do with it?" "Do not cast it out," the monk said gently. "Listen to it. Ask what it hides. Often beneath anger lies love, grief, and fear." For the next days, Anya practiced. When anger surged, when she saw a mother holding her child, or when thunder rumbled in the distance, she did not push it down. She breathed into it, as the monk instructed. At first, the anger screamed louder. You were robbed. You were helpless. You should have saved them. But as she breathed, the fury softened into sobs. And beneath the sobs, she discovered love, fierce, unbreakable love for those she had lost. The anger was not the enemy. It was the armor she had worn to shield her love. One afternoon, a boy from the village tripped near the riverbank and scraped his knee. He cried out, and something in his wail pierced Anya. She rushed forward, lifted him gently, and pressed a cloth against his wound. The boy's mother arrived moments later, thanking her through tears. In that moment, Anya felt a strange release. Where anger once demanded, "Why me?" compassion now whispered them too. She saw the shared fragility in every face, every child, every parent. Loss was not hers alone. It was the river that ran beneath all lives. That night, she spoke again with the monk. "I think I understand now," she said. "My anger was love that had nowhere to go. But when I gave it to that child, even in something so small, it changed. It became softer." The monk smiled. "That is compassion. It does not erase the wound. It teaches the wound to love." Anya still carried scars. She still cried when the memories returned too vividly. But now, when anger rose, she did not see it as a curse. She saw it as a signal, an invitation to turn pain into compassion. For the first time, forgiveness did not feel impossible. Not forgiveness for the storm, nor for death, nor even for fate, but forgiveness for herself. That night, as she lay beneath the canvas of stars, she whispered into the darkness, "I forgive you, Anya. I forgive you for not saving them. I forgive you for being human." And with that, the anger loosened. It did not vanish, but it no longer ruled her. In its place, a gentler strength took root, the strength of compassion. The village had begun to hum again with the rhythm of ordinary life. Hammers striking wood, the low songs of women grinding grain, the occasional burst of children's laughter drifting through the air, sounds that Anya once believed she would never bear to hear again. At first, these sounds tore at her, reminders of what she had lost. But little by little they began to feel different, not cruel echoes of absence, but signs of something still alive. One morning, while helping Marie gather herbs from the hills, Anya paused to notice a single wildflower pushing through a crack in the blackened earth. Its petals were thin, trembling in the breeze, yet impossibly vibrant against the backdrop of ash. She crouched down, staring at it with a tenderness that startled her. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of beauty, not as a knife but as a gift. Marie smiled knowingly. "Even the fire cannot burn away every seed," she said. Anya touched the petals lightly, as if afraid they might dissolve. A warmth spread through her chest. She whispered, almost without thinking, "If even the earth can bloom again, maybe I can too." In the evenings, she found herself lingering by the fire with the others. One night, a child offered her a roasted yam. Its taste was simple, earthy, but it filled her with a comfort she had not expected. She smiled, a small, hesitant smile, but genuine. The child giggled and leaned against her, as if trusting her presence. Something shifted in Anya at that moment. She realized she had gone an entire hour without drowning in memory. Grief still lived inside her, but alongside it now was this small ember of warmth. The monk noticed the change in her. As they walked along the river one afternoon, he said, "Grief and hope are not enemies. They live side by side, like night and dawn. Your pain has not left you, but now, so has joy returned." Anya frowned. "It feels wrong to smile when they are gone." The monk shook his head gently. "Smiling does not betray them. Smiling honors the life they gave you. Do you think they would want your love to become only sorrow? Or would they want it to grow into compassion, into laughter, into life?" Anya's eyes filled with tears, but this time the tears did not feel heavy. They felt cleansing, like rain on parched ground. Days passed, and Anya began to collect these moments as though gathering seeds. The flower on the hillside, the child's giggle by the fire, the sweetness of ripe berries after a long day's work. Each small joy was fragile, easily overlooked, but together they began to form a garden in her heart. At night, when shadows still pressed close, she remembered these seeds. Instead of drowning in knives of memory, she whispered to herself, "There is still beauty. There is still kindness. There is still breath." And slowly, a quiet truth took root. Her life, though scarred, was not over. The next morning, she returned to the field with the others, sowing real seeds into the soil. As her fingers pressed each seed into the earth, she thought, "This is what I am doing inside myself too," planting hope where there had been only ashes, trusting that something could grow again, even if it took time. And for the first time since that night of fire and flood, Anya felt not only the weight of loss, but also the pull of the future. Night had always been the cruelest time for Anya. It was in the silence, after the day's labor and the murmur of villagers had faded, that the knives of memory returned. The cries of her children, the crash of collapsing walls, the choking smoke, they would come alive in her mind until sleep was no longer rest, but a battlefield she dreaded. But one evening, after helping sow the village's new fields, she sat with the monk by the river. The sun was setting, and the water carried the last streaks of gold across its surface. She confessed, her voice trembling, "The nights still terrify me. I breathe in the day, But when darkness comes, I drown again. How can I rest without fear?" The monk tapped his staff lightly on the earth. "You are trying to conquer the night, Anya, but the night is not your enemy. What if you did not fight? What if you surrendered to it not in defeat, but in trust?" Her brow furrowed. "Surrender? Yes," he said gently. "Surrender the way the river surrenders each drop to the ocean, not clinging, not resisting, simply flowing. Let sleep come, not as escape, but as offering." That night, under the monk's guidance, Anya prepared differently. Instead of curling into herself, bracing for the storm of dreams, she lit a small lamp and sat cross-legged. The air was cool, the chorus of crickets rising steadily around her. "Close your eyes," the monk instructed softly. "Notice your breath, as you did before. But this time, each exhale is a release. Let go of the day, the ache in your body, the memories that chase you, the weight of what you could not control. With each out-breath, surrender." Anya obeyed. At first, the flood of memory resisted. Faces, screams, fire, they pressed against her mind. But with every breath out, she whispered to herself, "Let go. In, out. Let go." Her shoulders softened, her fists unclenched. Tears slid down her face, but they no longer felt like drowning, they felt like washing. The monk's voice continued, low and steady. "When sleep comes, treat it as a practice of trust. Trust that the world can turn without your control. Trust that life will hold you, even in unconsciousness. Sleep is not death, Anya. It is the river teaching you to release every single night." Her breathing slowed. Her chest rose and fell like the tide. The shadows still lingered, but they no longer screamed. They watched, powerless, as she surrendered her grip. At last, her body tilted gently to the side. Sleep arrived, not forced, not battled, but invited. For the first time since the night of loss, Anya fell asleep with peace in her heart. In the days that followed, she repeated this ritual each night, lighting the lamp, sitting in stillness, breathing, releasing. The nights were not perfect sometimes, memories still returned, sharp and cruel, but the difference was this: she no longer fought them, she acknowledged them, breathed them out, and surrendered again. Each morning she woke with a little more softness in her body, a little more clarity in her gaze. Sleep was no longer the enemy, it had become her teacher. One evening, sitting again with the monk, she whispered with a faint smile, "I thought surrender was weakness, but now I see it is strength. To let go, to trust, to rest, that is the courage I never had." The monk bowed his head. "And now you do. The night no longer owns you, Anya. You have learned to rest in the arms of impermanence." The first rays of dawn stretched across the village as Anya stood by the river, her reflection trembling on the water's surface. In her hand, she still held the ring she had once gripped so desperately, the small band of metal that for months had been both her anchor and her chain. Every scar in her heart seemed etched into its surface. She remembered how tightly she had clung to it, cutting her skin, believing that holding it harder would keep her husband's presence near. But the monk's words echoed within her now. To accept is not to abandon. To let go is not to forget. Her breath steadied. Slowly she opened her palm. The morning light shimmered across the ring. "It is not leaving me," she whispered. "It is returning to where it belongs." With gentle hands, she bent down and placed the ring on the water's edge. The current kissed it softly, then carried it away. For a moment, Fear surged inside her. Would this mean she had erased them, her family, her love, her past? But as the ring drifted downstream, she felt the opposite. She felt spaciousness, as though the walls around her grief had crumbled, leaving room for something new to enter. That evening, she spoke to the monk about what she had done. His eyes brightened with quiet approval. "You have learned the beauty of letting go," he said, "not as denial, not as erasure, but as freedom. Non-attachment does not mean you love less, it means you love without chains. Love flows more deeply when you do not try to own what can never be owned." Anya listened, tears in her eyes, but this time they were not bitter. They were tender, even sweet. She realized that the act of letting go had not severed her love, it had purified it. Where once her grief had been tangled with blame, guilt, and desperate clinging, now there was only love itself, clear and weightless. In the days that followed, she felt a subtle shift. She laughed more freely, not with guilt, but with gratitude. She worked alongside her neighbors, without feeling that every moment was stolen from mourning. When she sat in silence, she no longer carried the crushing weight of what could have been. She carried the gentle truth of what had been, and the strength of what could still come. One night, as she sat in meditation, she thought of her children's laughter. It no longer stabbed her heart. It rang like music in her memory. She let it echo, smiled, and then released it into the silence, as if returning it to the stars. Letting go had not diminished her story, it had transformed it. She understood now, impermanence was not cruelty, but beauty, the beauty of seasons, of rivers, of dawn and dusk. Everything moved, and in that movement, life revealed its brilliance. She whispered into the night, "You are with me, even as you are gone, and I am free, even as I still love you." The monk's voice seemed to drift on the wind, though he was nowhere near. This is the lesson of non-attachment. In letting go, you are not empty, you are open. And so, Anya entered her rest that night, not as a woman crushed by loss, but as one who had begun to bloom again. The ashes of her sorrow were still there, but through them seeds had risen, and in the quiet rhythm of her breath, she finally tasted the beauty of letting go. In the village, seasons had turned. The fields greened again. Children's laughter stitched itself back into daily life, and smoke from rebuilt hearths curled gently into the sky. Among them moved Anya, the woman who once lost everything. At first, villagers still looked at her with pity. They remembered the night of fire and flood, the night her screams tore through the storm. But as weeks became months, the story they whispered began to change. They no longer said, "That is the woman whose family died." They began to say, "That is the woman who carries herself with grace, though sorrow carved her heart." Anya herself felt the shift. She did not walk as one defeated, though grief would always be a companion. She walked as one who had entered fire and emerged, scarred yet luminous. One evening, as the sun bled orange into the horizon, a child approached her. "Is it true," the child asked timidly, "that you lost everything?" Anya crouched down, her eyes soft. "Yes," she said simply. The child frowned. "Then, how do you still smile?" Anya looked at the child for a long moment, then placed a hand over her own chest. "Because even when everything outside is gone, there is still breath here. There is still love. The storm could not take that from me." The child nodded slowly, as if carrying away a secret treasure, and Anya realized that her suffering had become more than a wound. It had become a lantern. As days passed, more villagers sought her presence. Widows asked how to face lonely nights. Parents asked how to endure fear of losing what they loved. Even young men, restless with anger, found solace in her quiet company. Anya never pretended to have answers, but she listened, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of someone who had truly suffered and survived. "I once thought I had to hold on or I would die," she told a grieving mother one afternoon. "But I learned that letting go does not kill love, it frees it." The monk, who had guided her from despair into stillness, watched with a faint smile. "You are no longer only a student of suffering," he said. "You are now its teacher." Anya shook her head. "I am no teacher. I am just a woman who has seen what the fire can burn and what it cannot." But she knew, deep within, that her pain had indeed transformed. Once, she was the woman who lost everything. Now, she was the woman who had learned that nothing is ever truly lost when it is held with compassion. That night, as she sat in meditation, she whispered into the darkness, "I am no longer only the woman who lost. I am also the woman who remains, the woman who breathes, the woman who can give." And as she drifted into sleep, her breath steady and calm, she realized that this identity, the woman who once lost everything, was not a burden, but a gift. A story that could help others, just as the monk's parable had once helped her. She had become the living proof that from ashes, a soul can bloom again. Anya often wondered, in the quiet hours before dawn, what was truly left of her life. The storm had stripped her home to ashes, stolen her family, scattered every possession she once thought defined her. By the world's measure, she had nothing, and yet, here she stood, breathing, walking, speaking, even offering comfort to others. One morning, while sitting by the river, she closed her eyes and asked herself aloud, "When all is gone, what remains?" At first, silence answered her. Then, slowly, the rippling water seemed to whisper back, "You remain." The thought startled her. She had always believed her identity was bound to her children, her husband, her home. Without them, who was she? But as the weeks unfolded, she began to notice the truth hidden beneath her losses. She still had her breath, steady and alive. She still had her heart, wounded but beating with love. She still had her awareness, the quiet witness that endured even in nights of unbearable grief. These could not be taken by flood or fire. They were not possessions, they were essence. The monk deepened her reflection one afternoon as they walked beneath the trees. "What do you see when a tree loses its leaves?" he asked. "A tree stripped bare," Anya replied. "And when spring returns, it blooms again." The monk nodded. "The leaves are gone, but the tree remains. So too with you. All you clung to were leaves, precious, beautiful, but impermanent. What remains is the trunk, the roots, the ground of being itself. That is where your true life rests." Anya felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were not bitter. They were tender, as though her heart itself was blooming in the realization. She began to live with this awareness. When she worked in the fields, she whispered, "The earth remains." When she breathed at night, she whispered, "The breath remains." When she felt love for the villagers, she whispered, "Compassion remains." Loss had taken much, but it had revealed something deeper, the indestructible core of her being, the part that no storm could touch. One evening, as she sat by the fire surrounded by neighbors, she realized she no longer introduced herself even inwardly. as the woman who had lost everything. Instead, she thought, I am the woman who discovered what remains. And what remained was more than survival. It was love, awareness, compassion, and the quiet strength to begin again. That night, lying beneath the stars, she whispered a prayer not of sorrow but of gratitude. Thank you for showing me that even when all is gone, I am not empty. I am what remains. And in that stillness, she understood. Impermanence was not just about losing. It was also about discovering the timeless truths that endure beyond every loss. Anya once feared impermanence more than anything. To her, it was the thief in the night, the cruel hand that had stolen her children, her husband, her home. Impermanence was fire, flood, and the silence after screams. It was the reason she woke in terror and wept into her hands. But as the moons passed and her heart softened into acceptance, she began to see impermanence in another light. One morning, sitting by the fields, she watched a small bird land on a broken branch. It sang only for a few breaths before flying away. For a moment, sadness flickered. Why must beauty vanish so quickly? But then she realized its very brevity was what made its song so precious. If the bird sang forever, she would have stopped listening. Impermanence, she saw, was not only the destroyer, it was also the giver of meaning. The monk explained it more deeply one evening as they walked together under a sky scattered with stars. Think of the sky, he said, pointing upward. Its beauty is endless because the stars are never the same. They rise, they fade, they move. If they remained fixed forever, you would cease to marvel. He looked at her with gentle eyes. Your family's lives were brief in years, yes, but the love you shared precisely because it was impermanent burned all the brighter. You still carry that fire. Impermanence is the gift that makes every moment alive. Anya stopped walking, stunned by the truth of his words. For so long, she had cursed impermanence, but without it, there would be no seasons, no sunrise after night, no laughter after tears. Without impermanence, there would be no possibility of healing. She began to notice it everywhere. In the wilt of flowers that gave way to seeds. In the way sorrow shifted into quiet moments of joy. In her own body, scarred but still renewing each day. Impermanence no longer whispered loss. It whispered renewal. When she knelt in the soil to plant seeds with the villagers, she smiled. The field was impermanent, yes, but that was its blessing. From emptiness came growth, from loss came return. One night, she sat by the river and held a pebble in her hand. She remembered how, in her grief, she had once hurled stones into the current as though trying to wound the world. Now she held this one tenderly. This too will erode one day, she murmured, and that is its beauty. She placed it gently back into the water, watching the ripples spread. Anya finally understood. Clinging had been her prison. Impermanence, once feared, had become her liberation. It taught her that everything passes, both sorrow and joy, both storms and blossoms. And in that passing was not only loss but possibility, the endless chance to begin again. Her heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered to the night sky. "Thank you, impermanence, for teaching me how to love while I can, and how to let go when it is time." From then on, when villagers asked her what she had learned through her suffering, she did not answer with bitterness. She said simply, "Impermanence is not my enemy. It is my greatest gift. Without it, I would never have known the depth of love, nor the courage to release it. Without it, I would not have become who I am." And in her eyes, those who listened saw something luminous, an acceptance so deep it looked like peace itself. As the seasons rolled onward, the village no longer looked at Anya with pity but with a quiet reverence. They saw how she had walked through the fire of despair and returned with a calmer, steadier gaze. And soon, people began to seek her not only for comfort, but for guidance. At first, she resisted. "Who am I to teach anyone?" she thought. "I am only a woman who has suffered." But one by one, they came. A mother who had buried her child, a man who had lost his crops to the flood, a young woman abandoned by her lover. They sat before her, as she once sat before the monk, their eyes full of pain, their voices trembling with questions that had no easy answers. And Anya, remembering her own long nights, began to share not doctrines, not rehearsed wisdom, but her lived truth. To the grieving mother, she said, "I once thought my heart had shattered beyond repair, but I learned the cracks were where compassion entered. Let yourself grieve, but do not believe grief is all you are. Beneath it, love still lives." To the farmer, she whispered, "The land is impermanent, as are storms. Plant again, even if your hands tremble. Impermanence does not only take, it also returns." To the abandoned young woman, she confessed, "I too felt forsaken, but being left forced me to meet myself. Sometimes loss is the doorway to a deeper self you never knew was waiting." Word spread beyond the village. Strangers began to arrive, pilgrims, wanderers, weary souls carrying burdens invisible to others. They came not for grand teachings, but for her presence, her story. And Anya realized something profound. Her pain, which once felt meaningless, had become medicine for others. The monk noticed this transformation with quiet satisfaction. One evening, as the two sat beneath the stars, he said, "You have turned suffering into service. You have become a lantern for those still stumbling in the dark." Anya shook her head humbly. "I only speak what I have lived. If it helps them, it is not my doing. It is the gift of the path itself." The monk's eyes softened. "And that humility is why your words heal." Her days filled with moments of teaching, though she never called it that. She showed others how to sit in silence with their grief. She guided them to the river, teaching them to let the current carry away their burdens. She told them the story of the wildflower growing from ash, of the bird singing only for a breath before flying away. But most of all, she told them this: you are not broken because you suffer. You are alive. And life, in its impermanence, is still a gift. One evening, after listening to a traveler pour out his tale of betrayal and despair, Anya said something she had never spoken before. "Once, I thought my story had ended in the ashes, but I see now it was only beginning. Pain was my first teacher, compassion became my second, and now, sharing it with you, I see the truth. Teaching is simply giving away the light pain once forced me to find." The traveler bowed deeply, tears streaming down his face. And Anya knew then that her suffering had not been wasted. It had been transformed. Her loss had become a bridge, carrying others from darkness toward peace. That night, as she lay beneath the stars, she whispered, "May my pain ease theirs. May my story remind them they are not alone." And for the first time, she did not dream of fire or flood. She dreamed of lanterns lit along a winding path, guiding countless souls toward a place of rest. The night was still. A crescent moon drifted above the quiet village, silver light spilling across the rooftops and the river. Anya sat alone on the steps of her small home, gazing at the stars. For years, the night had been her enemy, the place where screams and shadows returned. But now it was different. Now the night felt like an embrace. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The weight of her past, the storm, the fire, the silence after loss no longer bound her. They had become threads in the tapestry of her life, woven together with compassion and wisdom. Her story was no longer just her own. When people spoke of Anya now, they didn't only remember the tragedy, they remembered how she had transformed it. They told their children, "She was the woman who lost everything, but found peace. She taught us how to live again." And in those words, Anya's story became theirs. Her suffering became a mirror in which others saw their own, her healing a lantern that guided them forward. One evening, she walked again to the river, the same river that had once carried away her wedding ring. She knelt by its edge, cupping water into her palms. The water shimmered, then slipped through her fingers. She smiled. "This is life," she whispered. "It flows, it changes, it goes on. We cannot hold it, but we can cherish it." She knew then that her rest would come, not in clinging to what had been, but in surrendering to what was. And in that surrender, there was peace. Now, dear listener, as her story settles into your heart, it becomes more than just the tale of one woman. It becomes yours. Her grief may echo your own. Her letting go may remind you of what you, too, are learning to release. Her peace may invite you into your own, because when we hear the story of another, it stirs the quiet truth within us, that we too can endure, that we too can heal, that we too can find rest. So as you lie here, breathing slowly, let Anya's journey wash over you like the river's current. Let it remind you that impermanence is not only loss, it is the possibility of renewal, that even when everything seems gone, something remains. Love remains, compassion remains, breath remains. And in this moment, right now, you are safe. You are held by life itself. Close your eyes, release the day. Let the night carry you gently, as it carried Anya, into a place of stillness. May your sorrows grow lighter. May your heart grow softer. May your rest be deep and healing. And as you drift into sleep, remember this: you are never truly alone. Just as Anya's story has become yours, your story becomes part of the great tapestry of all beings, woven together by compassion, illuminated by impermanence, blessed by the quiet beauty of simply being alive. Good night, dear soul. May peace be with you, now and always.